Not every city is measured by the walls it leaves behind, and not every place is understood through stones that speak clearly. In the heart of Central Asia, where mountains meet open plains and ancient caravan routes once crossed before fading into silence, the land holds a memory older than maps and more enduring than written records. Here, the past does not shout. It whispers. It does not demand explanation, but careful attention. From sacred mountains wrapped in legend, to cities that once stood at the center of empires before quietly slipping into obscurity, from rocks carved with symbols across thousands of years, to solitary towers standing watch over landscapes that no longer remember the names they once carried, this film approaches places that were not built to impress, but to endure. This is not the story of a single civilization or a single moment in time. It is a slow unfolding of accumulated meaning, where geography merges with belief, trade intersects with ritual, and human presence becomes inseparable from the land itself. These are places not lost, but not fully understood. Stay with us, because what follows is not what disappeared, it is what remains silent, waiting to be seen. Simolotach. Hidden deep within the rugged interior of the Fergana Range, where narrow mountain corridors rise into wind-scoured plateaus and seasonal snow often lingers well into summer, the Simolotach petroglyph complex lies dispersed across a remote alpine basin. Situated at elevations exceeding 3,000 meters above sea level, its thousands of carved stones are scattered unevenly across slopes, ridgelines, and dry streambeds, embedded in a landscape that feels deliberately removed from ordinary patterns of human movement. Reaching the site is itself a deliberate act. Access requires long travel on foot or horseback through terrain that offers little shelter and few signs of modern presence. This difficulty reinforces the impression that Simolotach was never intended as a place of convenience or habitation, but rather as a location selected with purpose. At first encounter, the carvings appear understated, shallow incisions etched into darkened stone surfaces, easily overlooked against the vastness of the mountain basin. Gradually, however, the imagery begins to resolve. Animals caught mid-motion, hunters armed with bows, wheeled vehicles, solar motifs, and geometric forms appear across the rock faces. Some images are layered atop earlier ones, partially overlapping without fully erasing what came before. Others stand alone, isolated on individual stones, as though the mountainside itself had been revisited repeatedly and repurposed as a living surface of inscription across generations. Archaeological surveys estimate that Simolotach contains more than 10,000 individual petroglyphs, making it one of the largest concentrations of rock art in Central Asia. The carvings span a broad chronological range, from the late Bronze Age through the early medieval period. This extended time frame alone complicates any attempt to assign a single function or meaning to the site, suggesting instead a long tradition of engagement that evolved without ever fully severing ties to earlier practices. The stones themselves consist primarily of glacial erratics and fractured bedrock, naturally smoothed and darkened by age. Their patina provides contrast that allows the carvings to appear only under specific angles of light. This visual selectivity suggests that the creators understood not only form and symbol, but also how perception shifts with time, weather, and movement through the landscape. Many images depict both wild and domesticated animals, ibex, deer, horses, camels, rendered with varying degrees of realism. Other scenes appear more ritualized, human figures with exaggerated proportions, abstract symbols, and compositions whose meanings are no longer recoverable. Together, they point to a symbolic language that transformed gradually, accumulating rather than replacing meaning as belief systems changed. Scholars generally agree that Simolotach was not a settlement site. There is little evidence of permanent habitation, no architectural remains, hearths, or debris fields associated with daily life. This absence raises a fundamental question. Why was such an immense body of work created in such a difficult and inhospitable location? One prevailing interpretation views the site as a ritual or ceremonial landscape, possibly tied to the seasonal migrations of pastoral communities who moved livestock into high summer pastures and returned year after year. Yet even this explanation feels incomplete given the sheer density of carvings and their chronological depth. The elevation alone would have limited access for much of the year, and the persistence of carving activity across centuries implies a cultural significance resilient enough to survive political change, climatic fluctuation, and shifts in religious worldview. Although Simolotach lies far from major urban centers, it was not entirely isolated from broader cultural currents. The surrounding region was indirectly influenced by networks associated with the Silk Road, through which ideas, symbols, and technologies circulated. Certain motifs, such as wheeled vehicles and stylized solar imagery, suggest awareness of developments beyond local pastoral life, even if the site itself never functioned as a commercial or transit hub. Other images appear deeply rooted in animistic or shamanic traditions, closely tied to animal behavior, seasonal cycles, and the surrounding terrain. Complicating interpretation further is the widespread reuse of stone surfaces. New carvings were often cut over older ones, partially obscuring earlier images without fully erasing them. The result is a palimpsest that resists linear reading and instead implies continuity, repetition, and dialogue across time. This accumulation challenges modern assumptions about authorship and intent. Meaning here may not have resided in individual images, but in the act of carving itself, repeated over generations as participation rather than expression. Geological processes have further altered the site. Freeze, thaw cycles, erosion, and rock movement have displaced some stones from their original positions, making spatial analysis difficult and raising the possibility that the present distribution only partially reflects the original arrangement. Modern documentation efforts have catalogued many of the carvings, yet the sheer scale of Simolotach ensures that much remains unrecorded. Interpretation often relies on comparison rather than direct evidence, leaving room for overlapping and sometimes conflicting hypotheses. Local folklore continues to frame Simolotach as a sacred landscape associated with ancestral spirits or celestial phenomena. While such narratives cannot be verified archaeologically, they demonstrate how the site continues to generate meaning long after the last carving was made. Across both academic and local perspectives, one idea remains consistent. This was a place set apart, not for permanence or habitation, but for repeated return, observation, and engagement with forces perceived as larger than individual lives. As clouds race across the high basin and light shifts over the stone surfaces, some carvings briefly emerge with startling clarity before fading back into the rock. Visibility here is conditional, dependent on time, weather, and position. Simolotach offers no single narrative, no clear beginning or conclusion, only a layered record of human presence that resists simplification. In doing so, it quietly reflects one of archaeology's central truths, that some sites endure not because they provide answers, but because they preserve questions, patiently carved into stone and left exposed to centuries of silence. Burana Tower. Rising from the broad, wind-swept floor of the Chui Valley, where the foothills of the Tian Shan Mountains gradually dissolve into open grassland and cultivated fields, the Burana Tower stands as a solitary vertical presence in an otherwise horizontal world. Its slender brick form marks a landscape that once supported a thriving medieval city, now reduced to scattered ruins barely distinguishable from the soil itself. The tower's visibility is not owed to height alone, but to isolation. With little around it to compete for attention, Burana emerges as a quiet but persistent landmark. Today, the structure rises to approximately 24 meters, yet historical records and structural studies indicate that it once reached nearly 45 meters before earthquakes and centuries of gradual decay reduced it to its current truncated form. What remains is not imposing through scale, but compelling through proportion, balance, and restraint. Constructed primarily from fired brick, The tower's surface reveals intricate geometric patterns formed through subtle variations in brick placement. Decorative bands encircle the structure at intervals, becoming apparent only at close range. This understated ornamentation reflects a level of craftsmanship that suggests both technical mastery and aesthetic intention, even as the surrounding landscape offers few immediate clues as to why such care was invested at this particular site. Archaeologists identify the tower as part of the ancient city of Balasagun, a major urban center of the Karakhanid Khanate between the 9th and 11th centuries. Strategically positioned along northern branches of the Silk Road, Balasagun once facilitated the movement of merchants, envoys, scholars, and goods between Central Asia and China, serving as both a commercial and administrative hub. Unlike many Silk Road cities that gradually evolved into modern settlements, Balasagun declined and vanished, leaving Burana Tower as one of the few vertical elements to survive the slow erosion of time. Its function as a minaret is widely accepted, supported by its cylindrical form and internal spiral staircase, which winds upward through a narrow shaft toward an upper platform. From this height, the surrounding valley opens in every direction, reinforcing the tower's role as both a visual and symbolic focal point. The absence of a clearly identifiable mosque foundation nearby complicates this interpretation. This has led scholars to suggest that associated structures may have been built from less durable materials, or that the tower may have served multiple purposes across its lifespan. Around its base, low mounds and fragmented walls hint at former residential quarters, defensive structures, and public buildings, though their heavily eroded condition makes it difficult to reconstruct the city's original layout or scale. Adding further depth to the site is the presence of stone baubles, anthropomorphic markers associated with pre-Islamic Turkic funerary traditions. Some of these carved figures predate the tower itself, linking the area to earlier phases of occupation and ancestor veneration. Their presence suggests cultural continuity rather than abrupt transition, layering belief systems and practices across centuries. Written sources describe Balasagun as a center of learning and governance, and it is traditionally recognized as the birthplace of Yusuf Khas Hajib, author of the Kutad Gubaylig, one of the foundational works of Turkic literature. Yet while these texts affirm the city's intellectual importance, they offer limited insight into its physical form, leaving archaeology to bridge the gap between historical narrative and material remains. The tower's survival is often attributed to its tapered design and deep foundations, engineered to distribute weight and absorb seismic stress. Even so, repeated earthquakes gradually compromised the structure, breaking it down incrementally rather than causing sudden collapse. This slow deterioration paradoxically ensured its survival, preventing the kind of catastrophic failure that erased many comparable monuments. Excavations beneath the visible ruins have revealed earlier layers of occupation, indicating that the site was inhabited long before the Karakhanid period, possibly as early as the Sogdian era. This points to a much older continuum of settlement connected to irrigation systems and river-fed agriculture in the valley, reinforcing the idea that this location held enduring strategic and economic value beyond any single empire. Despite its historical significance, the reasons for Balasagun's decline remain uncertain. Theories range from seismic destruction and shifting trade routes to political instability and environmental change. None, however, fully explain why the city disappeared while nearby regions continued to support long-term habitation. The tower itself provides few definitive answers. Its interior is unadorned, its exterior weathered but intact, conveying endurance rather than explanation. Restoration efforts in the 20th century stabilized the structure and reconstructed parts of its base, but also altered aspects of its original appearance, raising questions about where medieval intent ends and modern interpretation begins. Standing beside Burana Tower, the vast openness of the valley becomes inseparable from the monument's meaning. The exposure of the landscape underscores how vulnerable any settlement here would have been, reliant on trade flows, political stability, and the delicate balance between steppe and mountain. As light shifts across the brick surface, patterns emerge and fade, suggestive but silent, with no inscriptions surviving to clarify their purpose. In this way, the tower functions less as a statement of presence than as a marker of absence. It does not overwhelm with grandeur or ornament, but persists quietly, inviting reflection through what remains unresolved. Like many monuments across Central Asia, its mystery lies not in myths of lost knowledge, but in the accumulation of small uncertainties that resist final answers. Burana Tower endures as a vertical echo of a vanished city, a structure that anchors history to place without fully revealing the forces that shaped it. It stands as a reminder that survival does not guarantee understanding, and that some monuments continue to ask questions long after their builders have disappeared. Suleiman II, the sacred mountain, rises abruptly from the flat expanse of the Fergana Valley at the very center of the modern city of Osh. Unlike distant, the rocky bulk of Suleiman II dominates its surroundings not through extreme elevation, but through contrast. Its 5 uneven peaks fracture the horizon in a landscape otherwise defined by openness, movement, and agricultural continuity. For thousands of years, this visual prominence has shaped how people perceive the surrounding space, marking the mountain as something distinct from ordinary terrain, a feature set apart by form as much as by meaning. Though embedded within the urban fabric, the mountain retains a clear sense of separation. Its slopes are visible from nearly every quarter of Osh, quietly asserting a sense of permanence amid political change and cultural transition. This constant visibility has allowed Suleiman II to function as both a physical landmark and a symbolic anchor, maintaining continuity across successive civilizations. Archaeological evidence indicates that human interaction with the mountain extends back several millennia, well before the emergence of written records. Petroglyphs, ritual platforms, modified caves, and worn pathways attest to repeated use from the Bronze Age onward. These traces suggest that the mountain's significance was neither accidental nor momentary, but gradually reinforced through sustained and repeated engagement. At first glance, Suleiman II appears entirely natural. Its cliffs, hollows, and ledges are shaped by erosion rather than construction, giving the impression of an untouched geological formation. Yet closer inspection reveals subtle human interventions: steps worn into rock faces, smoothed surfaces shaped by contact, and niches carved into stone. These features blur the boundary between natural landscape and cultural monument, making it difficult to distinguish where geology ends and human intention begins. Scholars generally describe Suleiman II not as a single archaeological site, but as a sacred landscape. Meaning here accumulated not through monumental architecture, but through ritual repetition, observation, and belief. Over time, the mountain adapted to changing religious frameworks while retaining a core identity rooted in place rather than doctrine. By the early medieval period, Suleiman II had become integrated into the spiritual geography of Central Asia. Osh lay along important corridors connected to the Silk Road, where merchants, pilgrims, and travelers encountered a landmark already invested with deep reverence. With the spread of Islam, the mountain became associated with the Prophet Solomon, Suleiman in Islamic tradition, from whom its name derives. This association reinforced its sanctity while overlaying earlier practices rather than erasing them, a process visible in the coexistence of Islamic shrines alongside pre-Islamic carvings. Caves within the mountain contain petroglyphs depicting animals, hunting scenes, and abstract forms. Some date to the 1st millennium BCE, while others reflect later artistic conventions, indicating that symbolic activity continued long after the site's earliest use. The persistence of these markings suggests that Suleiman II functioned as a point of contact between human communities and forces perceived as larger and more enduring than political authority. This role allowed the mountain to outlast shifts in power that transformed or erased nearby settlements. Yet despite its prominence, the specific nature of the rituals conducted here remains difficult to reconstruct. No detailed written accounts describe practices in depth, leaving archaeology to infer behavior through wear patterns, spatial arrangement, and comparison with other sacred landscapes. Some researchers interpret Suleiman II as a place of pilgrimage associated with fertility, protection, or healing. These interpretations are supported by later ethnographic accounts and by the physical act of ascent itself. Climbing the mountain requires effort, but no specialized equipment, making access achievable yet symbolically charged. Others emphasize its function as a territorial and orientational marker, a natural axis around which settlement, movement, and visibility organized in a valley where geography shaped trade and agriculture. Geological features further contribute to its symbolic power. Certain rock formations resemble animal or human forms, inviting interpretation, while the acoustics within caves amplify sound in ways that may have heightened ritual experience. Over time, Suleiman II absorbed layers of narrative, becoming not only sacred but storied. Its meaning was reinforced through repetition rather than codification. Modern conservation efforts recognize the mountain as a cultural landscape rather than a conventional archaeological site, acknowledging that its significance lies as much in continued use as in ancient remains. This living dimension complicates preservation. Erosion, urban expansion, and tourism place pressure on fragile surfaces that have endured largely through resilience rather than protection. Excavations have therefore been limited, reflecting an understanding that excessive intervention risks disrupting the continuity that defines the site. As a result, many questions remain unresolved. How early communities understood the mountain's power, how rituals evolved across centuries, and how meaning was negotiated between older belief systems and incoming religious traditions. Standing on its slopes today, one can observe the city below, the valley stretching outward, and distant mountains framing the horizon, a vantage point that clarifies why this place commanded attention long before modern borders or urban planning. Suleiman II does not preserve a single moment frozen in time. It offers no dramatic ruins or inscriptions demanding interpretation. Instead, it embodies a slow accumulation of significance shaped by geography, movement, and belief. Its mystery lies not in hidden chambers or lost civilizations, but in the endurance of sacredness itself, how a natural formation became, and remained, a focal point of human meaning across millennia. Tash Rabat. High in the secluded heart of the central Tian Shan Mountains, where narrow valleys channel icy winds and the horizon is fractured only by distant ridgelines and open alpine pasture, Tash Rabat reveals itself with little advance notice. One moment there is only grass, stone, and sky. The next, a massive stone structure rises directly from the earth, as if it were not built, but uncovered. The caravanserai's heavy walls appear almost organic in their emergence from the landscape. Constructed entirely of stone, the building seems less like an architectural insertion and more like a geological event. For centuries, its remoteness has defined its identity. Located at an elevation of over 3,200 meters, far from permanent settlements, Tash Rabat endures a climate of long winters, limited access, and prolonged silence, conditions that would challenge even the most determined travelers. At first glance, its purpose appears straightforward. Tash Rabat is traditionally described as a caravanserai, a roadside inn meant to shelter merchants, animals, and goods moving along the Silk Road. Yet almost immediately, the structure resists this simple classification. Unlike most medieval caravanserais across Central Asia, which were typically constructed from brick or timber and positioned near towns or fertile valleys, Tash Rabat is built entirely of carefully cut stone, fitted with remarkable precision and assembled without mortar. Its form prioritizes endurance over comfort. Thick walls, a low exterior profile, and minimal openings suggest defense against both climate and intrusion. The main entrance leads into a central hall, from which a complex network of more than 30 small chambers extends outward. Many of these rooms are roofed with corbelled stone domes, an engineering technique that distributes weight with striking efficiency. Such structural sophistication implies builders who possessed a deep understanding of load, pressure, and long-term stability, knowledge exceeding what might be expected for a temporary trade outpost. Decoration is almost entirely absent. The walls are plain, the spaces austere, reinforcing the impression that function outweighed ornament. Yet even this functional explanation begins to unravel under closer scrutiny. Tash Rabat lacks the large open courtyard typical of caravanserais elsewhere in the region. Instead, it favors enclosed interior spaces that feel inward-looking, even defensive, creating an atmosphere that is far more fortified than hospitable. Most archaeological assessments date the visible structure between the 10th and 15th centuries, though this wide range reflects persistent uncertainty. Some researchers suggest that the current building may rest atop earlier foundations, potentially extending its origins further back in time. This idea is echoed in local oral traditions, which describe Tash Rabat not merely as an inn, but as a fortress, a monastery, or a place of refuge, possibly predating the arrival of Islam in the region. Its location deepens the mystery. While Tash Rabat lies near historical trade routes, it is not positioned at a clear crossroads, nor does it sit along major river valleys that typically sustained long-term commercial traffic. During winter months, heavy snow would have sealed mountain passes entirely, making regular caravan movement impractical, if not impossible. Inside, the chambers are small and severe, some resembling narrow cells rather than lodging rooms. This has led scholars to debate whether they housed merchants, guards, monks, or another unknown group. Although soot marks on the ceilings indicate the use of fire, there is little archaeological evidence for prolonged habitation, extensive storage facilities, or animal enclosures sufficient to support large caravans over time. All of this complicates the traditional explanation without definitively replacing it. The quality of the stonework and the structural integrity of the domed ceilings point to skilled labor, careful planning, and substantial resources, suggesting sponsorship by a powerful authority. Yet no inscriptions, dedicatory plaques, or contemporary written records survive to identify who commissioned the structure or for what precise purpose. As a result, historians must rely on architectural comparisons and regional context rather than direct documentation. Some scholars have noted similarities between Tash Rabat and certain religious structures, particularly those associated with Nestorian Christianity, which was present across Central Asia prior to the spread of Islam. While definitive evidence is lacking, the theory persists on the fringes of academic discourse, supported by the building's inward-focused design and the contemplative, enclosed quality of its interior spaces. At the same time, the political landscape of medieval Kyrgyzstan was anything but stable. The region was shaped by shifting khanates, migrating tribes, and fluctuating control over trade corridors. It is entirely possible that Tash Rabat served multiple functions over successive centuries, adapting to the needs of different occupants while retaining its fundamental structure. Geological studies indicate that much of the stone used in construction was quarried locally. While this reduced the need for long-distance transport, it significantly increased the labor demands at such altitude. This again suggests organization, planning, and intent beyond improvised construction. Restoration efforts undertaken in the 20th century helped stabilize the building but also obscured certain original features, blurring the boundary between preservation and alteration and leaving unanswered questions about how the structure once interacted with its surroundings. Today, as clouds race across the mountain basin and shifting shadows slide over the stone facade, Tash Rabat continues to resist simple classification. It stands neither fully explained nor entirely unknowable, its silence shaped by centuries of weather, movement, and absence. It remains a fixed presence within a landscape defined by migration, impermanence, and change. And while its stones offer clues through their form and placement, they ultimately refuse certainty. Whatever its original purpose, Tash Rabat was built to endure, not to explain itself. In that restraint lies its lasting power, a structure that invites careful observation rather than definitive answers, as if its builders understood that time itself would be the final keeper of its meaning. Ak-Beshim. Spread quietly across the open plain of the eastern Chui Valley, where cultivated farmland gradually gives way to low grassland and the Tian Shan Mountains rise faintly on the horizon, the archaeological site of Ak-Beshim reveals itself without spectacle. Identified as the location of the ancient city of Suyab, the site announces its presence not through towering ruins or dramatic silhouettes, but through gentle undulations of earth, fragmented walls, and faint foundations that suggest a city once central to the political and cultural life of early medieval Central Asia. At first encounter, Ak-Beshim appears almost unremarkable. Its remains lie low against the ground, easily mistaken for natural variations in the terrain. Yet this very modesty speaks to the depth of time that has steadily reduced a once prominent urban center into a landscape of traces. Archaeological consensus identifies the site as Suyab, a major city active roughly between the 6th and 10th centuries, situated along a northern branch of the Silk Road where diplomatic missions, merchants, monks, and military forces moved between China, Central Asia, and the wider Eurasian world. Historical sources describe Suyab as a capital of the Western Turkic Khaganate and later as an important administrative center under Tang Chinese influence. It functioned as a crossroads where imperial ambitions intersected with local authority, trade, and cultural exchange. Yet while written records affirm its political importance, they offer only limited insight into the city's physical form, leaving archaeology to reconstruct its character from what survives beneath the soil. Excavations have revealed a complex urban layout that included fortified walls, residential districts, administrative compounds, and religious buildings, indicating a city designed for governance, defense, and sustained occupation. Much of this organization, however, is now discernible only through careful surveying and excavation rather than through visible architectural dominance. The absence of imposing structures above ground reflects not a lack of sophistication, but the cumulative effects of abandonment, reuse, and erosion. One of the most striking aspects of Ak-Beshim is the evidence of religious diversity preserved within its ruins. Archaeological findings point to the presence of Buddhist, Christian, particularly Nestorian, and later Islamic communities, suggesting that Suyab functioned not only as a commercial hub but as a place of cultural coexistence. The remains of Buddhist temples and stupas, along with fragments of wall paintings and sculptural elements, indicate that the city was once a significant center of Buddhist activity, connected to wider networks that carried religious ideas along trade routes linking East and West. These remains complicate simplified narratives of Central Asian history by demonstrating how belief systems often overlapped rather than replaced one another outright. Religious practices at Suyab appear to have shifted gradually, layering new traditions onto existing frameworks rather than erasing them entirely. At the same time, the city's fortifications reflect a more pragmatic reality. Thick defensive walls and controlled access points suggest persistent concerns over security in a landscape shaped by competing powers, shifting alliances, and mobile populations. Ak-Beshim. Spread quietly across the open plain of the eastern Chui Valley, where cultivated farmland gradually gives way to low grassland and the Tian Shan Mountains rise faintly on the horizon, the archaeological site of Ak-Beshim reveals itself without spectacle. Identified as the location of the ancient city of Suyab, the site announces its presence not through towering ruins or dramatic silhouettes, but through gentle undulations of earth, fragmented walls, and faint foundations that suggest a city once central to the political and cultural life of early medieval Central Asia. At first encounter, Ak-Beshim appears almost unremarkable. Its remains lie low against the ground, easily mistaken for natural variations in the terrain. Yet this very modesty speaks to the depth of time that has steadily reduced a once prominent urban center into a landscape of traces. Archaeological consensus identifies the site as Suyab, a major city active roughly between the 6th and 10th centuries, situated along a northern branch of the Silk Road where diplomatic missions, merchants, monks, and military forces moved between China, Central Asia, and the wider Eurasian world. Historical sources describe Suyab as a capital of the Western Turkic Khaganate and later as an important administrative center under Tang Chinese influence. It functioned as a crossroads where imperial ambitions intersected with local authority, trade, and cultural exchange. Yet while written records affirm its political importance, they offer only limited insight into the city's physical form, leaving archaeology to reconstruct its character from what survives beneath the soil. Excavations have revealed a complex urban layout that included fortified walls, residential districts, administrative compounds, and religious buildings, indicating a city designed for governance, defense, and sustained occupation. Much of this organization, however, is now discernible only through careful surveying and excavation rather than through visible architectural dominance. The absence of imposing structures above ground reflects not a lack of sophistication, but the cumulative effects of abandonment, reuse, and erosion. One of the most striking aspects of Ak-Beshim is the evidence of religious diversity preserved within its ruins. Archaeological findings point to the presence of Buddhist, Christian, particularly Nestorian, and later Islamic communities, suggesting that Suyab functioned not only as a commercial hub but as a place of cultural coexistence. The remains of Buddhist temples and stupas, along with fragments of wall paintings and sculptural elements, indicate that the city was once a significant center of Buddhist activity, connected to wider networks that carried religious ideas along trade routes linking East and West. These remains complicate simplified narratives of Central Asian history by demonstrating how belief systems often overlapped rather than replaced one another outright. Religious practices at Suyab appear to have shifted gradually, layering new traditions onto existing frameworks rather than erasing them entirely. At the same time, the city's fortifications reflect a more pragmatic reality. Thick defensive walls and controlled access points suggest persistent concerns over security in a landscape shaped by competing powers, shifting alliances, and mobile populations. Kumtor gold mine in Kyrgyzstan is one of the largest gold mines in Central Asia and a major pillar of the country's national economy. The mine is located at an altitude of approximately 4,000 meters above sea level in the Tian Shan Mountains, within the Issyk-Kul region, about 350 kilometers southeast of Bishkek, near the Chinese border. The gold deposit was discovered in 1978, and commercial production began in 1997. For many years, Kumtor was the largest private sector industrial project in Kyrgyzstan. It produced millions of ounces of gold and provided employment for thousands of workers, the majority of whom were local citizens. The mine played a crucial role in supporting the Kyrgyz economy through taxes, export revenues, and foreign currency inflows, making it one of the country's most important contributors to GDP and the state budget. In recent years, ownership and operation of the Kumtor mine were transferred to state control following prolonged legal disputes with the Canadian company Centerra Gold, which previously managed the site. Under the leadership of President Sadyr Japarov, the government launched a new underground mining project aimed at extending the mine's lifespan, increasing gold production, and reducing environmental impact. Today, Kumtor remains a central economic and political asset for Kyrgyzstan, symbolizing both the country's natural wealth and its efforts to achieve greater resource sovereignty while continuing to develop modern and sustainable mining practices. The Jeti-Oguz Rocks are one of Kyrgyzstan's most iconic natural landmarks, located in the Issyk-Kul region near the town of Karakol, approximately 25 to 30 kilometers southwest of the city center. The name Jeti-Oguz literally means 7 bulls in the Kyrgyz language, and it refers to a striking formation of red sandstone cliffs that appear like 7 massive bulls standing side by side against the mountain backdrop. These dramatic red rocks rise up to about 400 meters, 1,300 feet, above the valley floor and stretch across a wide swath of the Tersky Alatu mountain range, creating a breathtaking and unusual sight on the landscape. The area is both a protected geological monument and a beloved cultural symbol in Kyrgyzstan, celebrated in local art, songs, and stories. Local legend tells of two feuding khans who fought over a woman. In sorrow and conflict, their 7 loyal bulls turned to stone, immortalized as the red cliffs seen today. Close by stands another famous rock formation known as the Broken Heart, which many visitors see as a romantic symbol often featured in photos and folklore. The Jeti-Oguz region isn't only about dramatic rocks, it also includes lush forests, alpine meadows, and the scenic Jeti-Oguz Gorge, where the river of the same name flows toward the southern shore of Lake Isyk-Kul. The valley's natural beauty attracts hikers, photographers, and nature lovers from around the world. Nearby is the Jeti-Oguz Resort, famed for its radon and hydrogen sulfide hot springs, which have been used for therapeutic purposes for decades. Many visitors enjoy soaking in these springs while taking in the peaceful mountain air. Whether appreciated for its geological significance, romantic legends, or simply its awe-inspiring scenery, the Jeti-Oguz Rocks remain one of Kyrgyzstan's most unforgettable and photogenic natural wonders.